Welcome everyone tuning in from whichever part of the world, whether you're in Grenada, you're in the Grenadian diaspora, whichever parts of the Caribbean, internationally. We thank you so much for joining us yet again for another 5 p.m. panel. We are a group of Grenadian professionals in the diaspora working in collaboration with the Office of Diaspora Affairs to bring you timely, credible information during the pandemic times. So this is another one of our segments, Ask the Expert. And for today's session, we'll be focusing on the long-term impact of COVID in Grenada. And we'll be exploring a lot of major subtopics in health, education, economics, sports, and culture. So we want to take a really expansive view of pre-pandemic times, current pandemic times, and also looking towards the future and what does it hold for us in those various sectors. So to do this, we have an amazing team of panelists, and each will be adding a specific perspective on these big areas. So I just spent some time to introduce each of them, and then we'll dive into some of those major questions. We will also be entertaining questions from the audience. So if you have questions throughout the session that relates to any of the topics that we're discussing, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll address them throughout the session as necessary. So first on our panel, I'm going to introduce Dr. Alyssa Peters, and she will be discussing the health perspective when it comes to the impact of COVID. And she is a pulmonary and critical care physician working in Arkansas. And she has experience as a lung specialist and intensivist working on the front lines of COVID. She has worked in, Brooklyn, New York during the height of the COVID pandemic, but is born and raised in Grenada from Guava, St. John's. She also enjoys traveling and exploring and is hoping to get back to a lot of that when things become more normal, as she would say. And although she, doesn't love public speaking, she has decided to grace us with her presence today. So we thank you so much, Dr. Peters, for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
We're happy to hear more about your just your experience with health. So, and next we have Dr. Anthony Bridgman, and he will be providing the educational psychological perspective. And he has worked for 13 years as a high school principal at West Islip High School in Suffolk County, Long Island, New York. He's also a national and international educational consultant, a college professor of educational leadership. He also has training as a therapist, specifically in family therapy, and presents workshops, conferences, trainings, seminars, both in Grenada and internationally for teachers, school administrators, and the like. He has a BA from Brooklyn College, 2 masters from Long Island University, and MA and PhD at Hofstra University. He is originally from Byron, St. Andrew, and attended GBSS. Okay, so if you have any GBSS boys out there, you have a fellow alumnus. He also runs a foundation in Grenada called Bridging the Gap that provides resources for school children. And he'll most likely tell us more about that as we get into some of the questions. And overall, he's passionate about leadership, working with people, serving his community, lifelong learning, and traveling. So I see a theme here. A lot of our panelists love traveling, but probably haven't been getting the chance to do that, obviously, during our current times. So welcome, Dr. Bridgman. We're happy to have you. All right, next on the list, we have Mr. Michael Vincent, and he will be providing the cultural perspective for a lot of our questions today. And he works with the New York City Department of Small Business Services as an accountant, budget analyst, business promotions coordinator, and audit liaison to the Mayor's Office of Contracts. He currently lives in Brooklyn, but is originally from Vincent St. David. He attended St. David's Catholic School and taught at St. Dominic's RC School. He's also a community organizer and the current president of Grenada Cultural Festival Group Incorporated in New York. He is also the chairman of the organizing committee responsible for staging the annual Grenada and Carriacou and Petit Martinique Day Festival in Brooklyn, since 2009. He's also the father of 8 wonderful children, and he loves sports and was once an aspiring cricketer. All right, and also loves to cook. Okay, are you still aspiring, or has all the aspirations for being a cricketer vanished?
No. I still play on a competitive basis here in Brooklyn. Okay, just let you know that. I hope Mr. Bascom heard me.
Maybe you might get recruitment for something, after the session.
From the performance of West Indies today, they probably need somebody like me.
All right. And you love to cook. You want to share with us your specialty? Like if someone had to say you need to cook something for them.
Well, of course, I'm the king of the curry goat in Brooklyn, okay? And just let that be known. All right. Bascom, I think you know that. And I just love making some real serious lamby waters. Okay. But anything else, I can do it.
Okay. All right. So maybe you could share a dish with us one of these days to come.
One of these days. Exactly.
All right. So then this brings us to our next panelist. We have Dr. Don Charles, and he will be providing the economic perspective. So he is, we'll say, one of our brothers from down south. Okay, so we're going to adopt him as a Grenadian today. I'm sure he'll be okay with that, right? But Trinidad and Grenada, we're so linked in many ways. I bet you almost every Grenadian has relatives in Trinidad. And Dr. Charles is an independent economic research consultant. He has a BSc, MSc, and PhD from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine in economics. He has, as of to date, authored 48 peer-reviewed articles and has expertise and research interests in energy economics, econometrics, international trade and value change, climate change policy, and portfolio finance. His experience includes lecturing, industrial relations, project management, procurement, and administration. And he has been employed in the public service industry, private sector, and UN organizations as well. So he has vast experience in economics in the region and internationally, I would say. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Charles. Welcome to the program.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the warm introduction.
All right, thank you. And then our final, but by no means least, we have Mr. Michael Bascom, and he will be providing our sports perspective. And he currently resides in Brooklyn, New York, where he works with the Department of Homeland Security and is part of a national deployment force. So he travels to various locations on special US assignments. He is a sports enthusiast, expert, and a former journalist. He began his media career in 1987 and worked in various sectors of the media until he retired from full-time media about 4 years ago. The 2016 Olympic Games in Rio was his final major sporting event project, but among some of his career highlights, he was on location and also the first journalist to interview Kirani James when he won Grenada's first Olympic gold medal in London in 2012. He's also the only Grenadian journalist to cover 6 Olympic Games. And he's also the founder and main organizer of the first Grenada Invitational Track and Field Meet. He subsequently relinquished his positions, but of course he got that started. He is originally from River Road, St. George, and his hobbies include all things sports. I would say watching sports on TV, discussing sports, hosting sports programs. And he also, in fact, actually has a program that he currently hosts weekly called Talk Sports. So welcome, Mr. Bascom.
Thank you very much.
So we look forward to your perspective on sports in Grenada and the Grenadian diaspora as well.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So again, to begin the panel, we're thinking that it's best to take a look at pre-pandemic time. So we get an idea of what things were like before in these various sectors, so we can better understand how they have changed and how they may be impacting our future. So I'd like to start with Dr. Alyssa, and could you just tell us a little bit about, what the health system looked like or what hospitals looked like before the pandemic. Could you just reflect on that for us? Maybe tell us some of the challenges back then or some of the successes we had back then, but just help us understand what we were looking at with regards to health pre-pandemic.
Okay, so as you've mentioned, my field is pulmonary, that's the lung, and working in the ICU. So pre-COVID, especially like if you're doing pulmonary, like just the seeing consults on the floor, typically your load will be probably like between 2 consults to maybe like 8 or 10. Sometimes in the ICU, though you have a bed that has a capacity for maybe like 20 patients, at most at any point you'll have like 12 patients. Hardly ever you'll see like a full ICU. You'll have time to do procedures, and you would pretty much get in at a certain time and leave at your designated time. COVID came around, and being in New York, your consultation list went from like 8 at max to sometimes at the end of the day, 50, sometimes 55 patients. The ICU went from a 20 bed to 150 bed capacity, as in there were all sorts of makeshift ICUs. The operating rooms became ICUs, the recovery rooms, surgeries had to go on hold. Elective surgeries were not happening. Emergency rooms became ICUs. We had to get people from outside to come to help. It was pretty chaotic. Many times you had patients that needed an ICU, needed mechanical ventilator, and just couldn't get it. You had to triage patients based on how well you think they'll actually recover, based on their ages sometimes. And many times every patient had needs, but then you just had to really pick and choose. And it was different, it was tough. Many times, despite your best efforts, patient died. So it was pretty dramatic. That was like March, April, May. Now there was a second surge, and again, there was an increase in the number of cases, but nothing in comparison to last year. And now again, we're seeing that some of the cases are down. So, and as we've noticed with vaccination, patients may become infected. You may get consulted on patients on the regular floors, but many times the vaccinated patients are not the ones who end up in the ICU and the mechanical ventilator, ending up being trached and eventually sometimes dying. So yeah, that's my experience so far.
Thank you. And I think that's a lot of people's experience, like that drastic switch from, pre-pandemic to actual pandemic. And just personally, what has that transition been like for you? Were you able to like quickly get on board, or was it something that you slowly accepted? Or
always, actually, but to dive in, I even caught COVID. Lost one of my mentors because he passed. But you quickly had to adjust. And sometimes you, as I said, you take on the responsibility. Like, I've never actually worked as hard as I did, take on as much patients as I did. And then many times, like, as I wasn't training at the time, and my seniors, they actually had to take up attendings positions, like prior to their graduation date, because we're so understaffed and patients were just coming. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, and highlighting that, that drastic switch. And Dr. Bridgman, I'll just turn over to you now. I imagine you experienced a similar thing in the educational field. So I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about what education was like pre-pandemic and what that switch sort of involved for you personally, and probably the educators that you come in contact with.
Thank you, and good evening to you and the panelists, and to all the viewers, to my educators friend in Grenada. Welcome, and thank you for everything that you have done and continue to do to support children in Grenada. As an educator, I gotta tell you, March 11, 2020 still lingers in my mind. We were one of the first schools to close at that time because we had one positive case in one of our elementary schools. We didn't know what it was. And we learned a lot since then. So we went home that day thinking that we are going to go back to school that Thursday. And we never did until, later that summer, the administrators went back. As the doctor said, Dr. Peter said that it's tremendous work. I got to tell you, I love in-person learning. When students are in school, it matters. It's very effective. And doing it online, we were one of the few schools that were prepared because our students had Chromebooks. However, our teachers were not ready to switch to online learning. Some of them did not put together their Google Classrooms and stuff. So we had to do a lot of online workshops for our teachers. Pre-COVID, that we had in person, we had graduation, we had our music events, we have our sports events, our athletic events, we had our cafeteria where students were together, a socialization process. And I mean, for someone like me who like really going out there and kind of hanging out with my students, it was difficult to do that with COVID because it was an unknown. And then we had a number of cases when we reopened school and stuff, and being the contact tracer in my school, walking around calling students in my office to say that, hey, I have to send you home because you are close to a positive case was very difficult. Initially, again, we had to send a whole lot of people home, but then the CDC, the Department of Health in New York here, started changing them because we learned more about the disease. And I think right now we're in a better place, but I got to tell you, it was a very difficult piece. And I know in Grenada, when they were not ready, and not to any faults of their own. This was something new. And I think where they are right now, they have made tremendous progress with regards to preparing the technology and for students. And now they're talking about students, the return of students to school, which I think is a very important aspect.
Okay, thank you. And I'll get back to you to discuss some of those challenges a bit more, especially in relation to Grenada. But I'd like to move on now to Mr. Vincent. So Dr. Bridgman mentioned just a lot of the aspects that you had before, the events, the community that you no longer have in education. And I imagine these are the same sort of things we experience with culture. So Mr. Vincent, could you tell us a little bit about first of all, when we talk about culture, what do we mean? What are the various aspects of culture, especially in the Grenadian community, and also what it was like before the pandemic?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you once again for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel. I have to say off the bat, I'm not an expert on culture, but I'm a defender of culture. Okay?
I like that. Yeah, we'll take that.
Of culture.
Yes, we'll take defender.
I think every one of us should adopt that title, defenders of our culture. All right. And my good friend from Trinidad, you don't know me, but I'm from behind the bridge in Belmont. Okay. All right.
Sure.
just to let you know a little thing there. All right. So pre-pandemic, I mean, what it is we used to do. I mean, our culture has drastically been altered, has been assaulted, for want of a better word here, because of COVID. Okay. We, as a people, our culture, enables us to be identified by our mode of dress, the way we speak, the food we eat, and some of the things that we are accustomed to, like attending churches on a Sunday and Saturdays, funerals, weddings, visiting friends and family, simply hanging out on a weekend in the party halls and so on, shopping, freedom of movement, But with the advent of COVID-19, we see all of those things under attack, under heavy assault. And we have to think that this is not us. This is not what we are as a people. This is not our culture. This is not our way of life. So our culture is our way of life. And pre-pandemic, we all, went about normal courses of just doing our normal things, a normal way, and paying attention to other things and not thinking that in the twinkle of an eye, that our culture would be assaulted in such a vicious way. So, I think at this point, we have to be very mindful that we are in a place right now that we have to think, how do we get back to where we were? How do we get back and be better than the way where we were? COVID not supposed to conquer us. We supposed to beat that thing. And I think we do have the tools and the mechanisms and the science and everything in place in which our people and people of the world can combat this vicious disease head on. So at this point, the ball is in our court.
Yeah. Go ahead. You want to add something, Dr. Pictures?
Oh, no. It surely is.
Yeah. I mean, while you're talking about, just hanging out or, the food we eat or, seeing the neighbor, and it's like the directives that you have to follow when, there's a pandemic sort of goes completely against that, as in isolation, no sort of congregating with the public or with your churches, everything's now online. So in many ways, as you're saying, the culture has been attacked. And sometimes we don't think of, just the ramifications of that.
Yeah, I mean, you think about, for example, that solemn thing as a funeral.
Yeah.
Unable to attend the funeral of loved ones. I mean, that has to hurt to the core. Mother died in the United States or in Grenada, vice versa, England, wherever it is, and you just can't be there. Okay, then you're looking for a body to identify. That body must have been buried in a mass grave somewhere because of all, what has happened that went to an uncontrollable situation at one point. That's an assault. And we cannot accept that. I don't think we should ever entertain the idea of having to live with COVID. No, we have to beat COVID.
I like that. And even, like funerals being, live streamed, while you have that access, it's great. But, it's for a lot of people, it's not the same. For a lot of people, they still can't access those things. So in many ways, while we have these mechanisms in place to sort of replace, those cultural aspects, they may not be ideal for the Grenadian public.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. So that, and culture, Mr. Bascom, I'll come to you next. It sort of ties with sports, and sports is such a huge part of our culture as well. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about, first of all, the significance of sports to Grenada, or even to Grenadians in the diaspora, and sort of where we were pre-pandemic with regards to sports.
Thank you once again. Well, sports very important to the psyche of Grenadians, and I assume whether it's Michael, whether it's Dr. Bridgman, I'm hoping or I'm guessing Dr. Peters may have involved in some level of sports, whether it's competitive, whatever, but very, very important. And, whether it's the competitive sports of it or whether it's just the recreational aspect of it, it's important for our development. And I'm certain Dr. Bridgman, as an educator, will probably lead into that to some extent, how important it is, even in his in school, the involvement of sports. I see him posting sometimes photos and videos of him and his, students, etc., etc. And particularly in the Caribbean. I said Grenada, but I think it's something in the Caribbean. It's big. Dr. Charles will tell you that in Trinidad, for example. And if we have folks who know how important sports have been for the folks of Jamaica, as another example, and the Bahamas, and the twinning of sports and tourism, sports tourism. And we have seen over the past decade in particular, how sports have really propelled the image of Grenada on the international scene, with the likes of Kirani James and others, Kirani in particular, and how it has sort of not just galvanized the people around sports, but sort of motivate others, because we are seeing now a cadre of young athletes, and I would say track and field for now, because that seems to be the, you know, the mojo of Caribbean people in particular when it comes to sports, track and field, football to an extent. And I heard Michael said cricket, you know, I don't want to talk too much about that, you know, but so much so that it is very important. And, you know, even though prior to the pandemic, sports were being played, you know, throughout the Caribbean, we have seen what it has done, how it has affected during the pandemic. It basically came at a halt to some extent. And even in some aspects of the Caribbean, for example, sports is still a bit limited, okay? The you know, competitive sports are a bit limited. We know, for example, with the cricket, for example, it was basically in a bubble. So they played all the cricket, whether it was in Antigua, whether it was in St. Kitts, in a bubble. We are seeing that gradually, as things started to, you know, improve, and hopefully we may see probably in the new year more competitive sports, with England touring the region and Grenada hosting matches as well. We may see a sort of improvement in terms of that. But it has really had an impact, especially on our elite athletes, our elite sportsmen and women, to the point where some of them basically, in some instances, they were affected to the point where they had to curtail, and in some areas they had relocated. So for example, Kirani Jane moved from Alabama to Arizona. The likes of Lyndon Victor and Kurt Felix, and let me see, there's someone else who have moved to the West Coast, I should say. They were more in the Midwest, yeah, to the West Coast. And in some instances, some of them trying to get into some of the states where the protocols are more relaxed and where they can have some more competition, some more training, et cetera, et cetera. So that has really had an impact on our elite athletes. As in terms of our college athletes, well, we know most of the colleges have, they were closed, and most colleges had online learning. So sports was a no-go for most of our track and field, and in some instances, basketballers, some of those who play basketball at colleges and things like that. So that's the situation as it is now in terms of sports. But we are seeing a gradual improvement, and in some instances, like in Grenada, we see football, we saw some cricket. I think some of them were some test events to some extent, and it was done in collaboration with the Ministry of Health. Even though it was limited in terms of spectators and things like that. So, but we've seen a gradual improvement and more participation. Hopefully, as things improves, we will see more and more competition, especially in Grenada.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I like that you highlighted the unifying aspect of sports, you know, in Grenada or even across the Caribbean. And the fact that you said, you know, it's important to our psyche. So I can imagine for these athletes as well, it was a blow to their psyche, or, you know, just their mental, emotional health at that time.
Yeah.
And as well as an economic impact, because, you know, for many of them, that is their livelihood. So it has a lot of those ramifications, you know, just beyond what we may initially think about.
Yeah. Well, and we saw the results showed in the recent Olympic Games in Tokyo. With only Kirani James, you know, winning a medal, and we didn't have a very large team, et cetera, et cetera. It had to do a lot with the restrictions some of our athletes have in terms of preparation at this level.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Dr. Bridgman, you have something to add?
I think Mike made a very valid point. The importance of sports, especially with regards to education and students. When we talk about the whole child, it's not only about academics. We have to look at the emotional piece and the physical aspect of that child, and sports is important. And I'm so glad out here in Suffolk County, in New York State, we are one of the highest percentage right now with COVID cases, positive cases. Yet for all, we are continuing with school and with our sports. Yesterday, I had my homecoming, and it was one of the best things possible with regard to the number of people who came out and support our football team. It's really, I mean, last year when we didn't have it, you could have seen the negative impact it had on students. They were angry, they were upset and stuff. But once we started, and I think as Grenada move forward right now, in-person learning, we got to get back to sports. We have to get back to students competing against each other and stuff. And it's safe. Soccer is safe because you're not in that close contact and you're in the outside environment. So the science is, and the doc will tell you that, the science is there to support that. So great point.
Yeah, thank you. I like that. Focusing on the whole student and developing the whole student and not just the academics, because it's null and void without developing the whole person. All right, so we sort of touched on the economic impact as well. So I'd like to move over to you, Dr. Charles. And if you could sort of give us the state of the Caribbean pre-pandemic and, generally what things are looking like for us right now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Patterson, for the warm introduction, and thank you for your invitation to be on the panel today. Now, if you look at the Caribbean economies prior to the pandemic, so 2018, 2019, there's a lot of things that we used to take for granted. So if you look at the structure of the Caribbean economies, we had the goods producing economies and we had the service producing economies. So generally, the goods producing economies, them, that's like in CARICOM, that would be like Trinidad, Tobago, it would be Ghana, it would be Suriname, it could be like Jamaica. They generally produce, in terms of the export structure, they produce a lot of goods and export to different markets. Whereas if you look at the service producing economies, these economies tend to rely on, let's say, services, especially countries in the Eastern Caribbean, they rely a lot on services. Now, I'm saying this, but countries still export goods. Take, for instance, if you look at under the Lome trade agreements and the Cotonou and the recent economic partnership agreement, a lot of Eastern Caribbean countries, like let's say St. Vincent, Grenada, and so forth, they produce a series of agricultural commodities and they export to the European market. So I mean, all of the services producing countries, they still produce and export goods and so forth. So that's just generally the structure. And the countries had a series of problems. Take, for instance, a lot of the countries are small island developing states and highly vulnerable to climate change. So that's sea level rise, and that's the increased frequency and occurrence of extreme weather events like hurricanes and so forth. Of course, we know about hurricanes Irma, Maria, and Dorian recently, how they devastated a lot of countries. We have a problem in the Caribbean where a lot of countries are experiencing high debt. So a lot of countries' debt to GDP ratio is in the vicinity of like 100% of GDP or even more, which is high. And countries generally produce a lot of goods and services and export to, let's say, the US and so forth. And there's a lot of things people take for granted. People just kind of walk out on the road normal. People kind of shop. People kind of engage in entertainment. I mean, take for instance, like going parties and just being able to interact with people physically normally. These are things we took for granted. I didn't think that this was a big deal, but then COVID came, and COVID was like a major macroeconomic shock. It wasn't just macroeconomic, it was a social shock, it was a health shock, it was an economic shock. It almost affected almost every single component of people's lives. Now, COVID, from a medical point of view, at that point in time when the WHO declared COVID a pandemic in March 2020, there was no cure, there was no vaccine. So countries responded by implementing a series of non-pharmaceutical measures to contain the transmission of this virus. I'm sure Dr. Peters could elaborate more upon it. But generally speaking, we know the soft measures, like let's say the mask wearing mandates, encouraging people to wash their hands and practicing social distancing. And then governments eventually, they implemented a series of more aggressive measures. Let's say they closed the borders, they shut down key sectors such as the entertainment sector, the sports sector, the tourism sector. I mean, these things are significant because when they shut down sectors, it affects people, it affects livelihoods, it affects the jobs and income ability. And the shutting down of these sectors, this was necessary, yes, to prevent the transmission of COVID because they're preventing the direct interaction of people. But at the same point in time, there were demand side effects and there were supply side effects. So from the demand side, when governments implement a series of stay-at-home measures, people are at home and people can't go out and consume as before. Yes, Amazon, yes, eBay, you can still buy online. But I mean, you can't go to the store and actually buy things like before. You can't go to, like, some people like to shop, spend their recreation times in bars. Some people like to go to sporting facilities. Some people like to go to cinemas. So you can't go out and interact and mingle as before. So there's a demand side effect. There was a decreased demand. So that's one aspect. The next aspect was a supply side effect, because other governments shut down every sector with the exception of the essential services. So what this meant is a lot of idling of production from factories. So generally speaking, I mean, production was less, and this had significant repercussions, because if you have weaker demand, you have weaker production, obviously you will have reduced international trade. So that's one. The government will experience a decrease in revenue, and then people's livelihoods will be affected in terms of you was working before, you had a source of income, and now it basically your livelihoods were just taken away from you because of the pandemic and because of the containment measures, and you're now left in some cases without income. So I mean, some people would have been significantly be affected negatively by the pandemic from both health side and economic side. And the whole question is that now that the pandemic here, people have been affected. How do we, I'll say adapt, because I mean, this has lasted way longer than I anticipated. And I thought this would be over in a few months. I mean, this is 2021.
It's not looking like that, right?
It's going into 2022. So I mean, so like, how can we live with the pandemic? So it's all about resilience. How can we build resilience? How can we build back better, stronger? And how can we adapt and survive the pandemic? So that's what the trust of the Caribbean economy is going forward.
All right, so thank you so much. And I'll touch back with you in a bit about some of your work on like supply chains and how that has, affected our Caribbean people. But I'd like us to move back to health for a bit. And Dr. Charles, you mentioned that as well, just, the economic impact on health. So Dr. Peters, I'd like you to tell us a little bit more about just your experience on the front lines, and especially in that, those, critical environments. So your experience with, just as a lung specialist, and also you've had the opportunity to work with, the fortunate patients in, outpatient clinics as well. So could you just tell us a little bit about that, the critical cases, but also the fortunate ones in the outpatient cases?
So as I mentioned, during the height of the pandemic, you saw so many patients, so many died, so many eventually go on to requiring like tracheostomies and having to be shipped off to nursing homes. And I know the level of cases that many of these nursing homes actually rose quite a bit. Eventually, sometimes, I guess we were, as you said, some patients were fortunate enough to be able to go home, most of which required oxygen. So even prior to the pandemic, they had no oxygen requirements, but because of so much severe lung injury, they go on to requiring oxygen. Some suffered, and even now, like even weeks and months after the actual infection, patients still are having symptoms like shortness of breath and not being able to do as much as they were able to. Just standing up will make them dizzy. They feel like their hearts are beating so fast. Some patients complain of brain fogs, as in they can't remember some things. Their judgment is somewhat off. Some patients even go as far as experiencing like some PTSD-like symptoms, as in just from like the extended hospital course, because many of them stayed in the hospital for an extended period. So it definitely had some great impacts in terms of, and then just many of these patients, they took up a lot of resources. If we're talking about the economic aspect of things, they required a lot in terms of different specialties, in terms of medications, because initially we had no idea what we were doing in terms of what worked, what didn't work. So we were pretty much throwing the kitchen sink at almost every patient. Some things worked, some things didn't. And so it was a lot. Still now, we're still trying to figure things out. But as I mentioned, with vaccination, we have noticed a dramatic decline in terms of how severe patients' symptoms have been and the requirement for critical care and mechanical ventilation and all the complications that go with it.
Okay. I'm glad you brought up even the economic impact. I'm wondering if you experienced like patients falling through the cracks because of, lack of resources or, the kind of care that they might need.
That would somewhat be kind of difficult to assess, as I know, like being in New York, many times most patients have availability. I worked in Kings County, so many patients, they had access to healthcare. In terms of them having an available appointment because of the volume, that was an issue because, as I mentioned, your workload went from having just a couple patients to having like triple the amount. So in terms of getting availability to see a specialist after getting discharged, it was somewhat difficult. But in terms of financing, not really.
Okay. Yeah, because I guess it's touching on like you're saying, with the volume increase, then it's putting, strain on the available resources. So yes, it definitely ties to economic impact and future economic impact as well. All right, thank you. So I'd like us to just switch back to education for a bit. So Dr. Bridgman, I'm going to come to you. And you sort of mentioned generally some of the challenges, but I wanted to know if you could probably tell us a little bit more of the challenges currently that educators are experiencing, and not just, I'm thinking, the various levels. So we have, at the probably leadership or governmental level, also the administrative level, also the teachers and the parents who are also a part of the education system in some ways, and the children. So just sort of that impact across the board you're seeing with the challenges when it comes to eventually immediately having to switch online and adapt.
Yeah, and thanks for the question. And I think the integration of all the things people are saying, we can see how it meshed together with the topic that you're discussing. With regards to the COVID and education, I have never seen the number of people retiring so quick in education as I've seen since COVID. I got to be honest with you.
Interesting.
A lot of school administrators out here have really abandoned and said, I got to go. It's too much, the pain, the workload. And again, this is why I'm a strong believer in having a good balance in your life, because it's too much. It's a lot. We are there at the front line, and we have to deal with the emotionality of COVID with regards to parents' issues, parents who died and stuff, and those issues that are affecting us. So from that perspective, we have seen that COVID has really caused trauma in the lives of a lot of students, and even with parents and teachers. Sometimes we forget our teachers who are at the front line, because we've asked them to start this process with regards to online learning. And it takes a lot of training to do that, in-person learning. We understand education, chalk and talk. That was the form of education for a lot of folks. And now they had to shift to the online platform, and some have shifted with the same approach, and that's not effective at all with regards to that aspect. We have seen the disengagement and the disruption that COVID has caused with regards to students, and also the physical isolation that it has caused with a lot of our students. We are all social beings. Schools are a part of what we call the socialization aspect of schools. Students go to school and they socialize. And now we ask them to stay at home behind a screen, behind a cell phone. And we don't know one of the aspects of it also, and I had to face it when we are exposed to that. We don't know what's going on in the homes of our students. There are a lot of factors in Grenada that we're talking about, the number of students who are school age, and each one has to be up behind a screen for school. Sometimes the parents also have to be working from home. So space is a problem. So when teachers don't see them participating, and teachers may say, wow, I'm trying my best here and the students are not involved. We got to understand the home life. And that's the negative impact of online learning. And I'm so happy, as I said before, for students to be back in personal learning. But when they come back, I think every school should have an effective reentry plan. And the reentry plan should have a number of facets here. Social emotional learning is very important. We say a lot about students have lost learning. I am not a believer in that. I'm a believer in that students have instruction loss because of the issues that we are facing. They're very resilient. Take them where they are and let's focus upon where they need to be. It's not about coverage. It's not about a curriculum that have to cover X number of things by X date. That's the old ways of teaching. Focus upon the depth of understanding. Focus upon the students in front of you. When they come back, how is it at home for you? Tell me about the struggles you've had with online learning. Spend the first few days with students about those issues. We're seeing depression. We're seeing anxiety. We've seen a lot of suicidal ideation and folks who have attempted and who have been successful dying by suicide. It's a very negative and big impact of our school. So we as educators have to provide all the necessary services. So here, they need academic support. They need positive behavior intervention. They need counseling service, psychological services, school health services, social skills. Don't just, when they come back, let's get them in. Let's start teaching again. Focus upon the whole child, the get start. So I would advise my Grenadian educators, November 1st, when students come back into your building, into your school, get to know them again. How can we be able to serve you and connect with them? That's so important in terms of the connective aspect of our kids. So, and with the parents, I think the parents need support. Parents needs lots of support. And tomorrow I'm doing a presentation for the GBSS parents on social emotional aspect, how to identify the negative aspect of depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation in your students. We need those services in Grenada. We need to talk about those things more. And, you know, as a former student down there, we never did. We put it aside and pray about it. Come on now, folks.
Yeah.
wanted,
Jill, I just wanted to, because I wanted to.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to, because I recall sometime last week or just recently, Dr. Bridgman had a post on social media, and I wanted him to develop more on it because it comes in what he just spoke about. He has been adamant that parents should not engage in pressuring their children in the 14 and 15 subjects, but more so on the holistic development. And I think that is what you're getting at there, Mike, right, Doc?
Mike, you need me. I need my own program for that.
You know,
you come on, don't get me in trouble. Yeah, we gotta reimagine education in Grenada. We have to reform our educational system in Grenada. The focus is too much on the assessment at the end and how many passes you get, man. The boast that comes at the end. That's all we do. How many will get 17 ones and stuff? And I ask the question, what did they learn? Okay. Where are there? Like I asked, let's do a longitudinal study of those students who get all these ones and the boast that we make. Where are there? I believe in teaching for transfer and teaching for adaptability. That's the key pieces that we have to teach for, not about passing a summative assessment at the end. That's the old ways of education. Look at any model now with education. It's about the growth of the child, the whole child, man. We need to get back into that and maybe do a lot of workshop and training with our folks about that. And it's not only Grenada, it's throughout the Caribbean. The CXC needs to have reimagine CXC and those things, or whatever, you know, institution that we use for those things. We really have to change it because teachers are teaching to a test. Teachers are preparing kids to pass a test, but they're not preparing them for the 21st century. We're 21 years in the 21st century. Right? They're not.
Prepare them for life.
So don't get me started, folks.
Well, Jill, I just wanted to come in here as an ex-teacher myself. Well, I still consider myself a teacher in a lot of respects because I got kids here. The point that Dr. Bridgman was making concerning the holistic learning in terms of getting that, that child coming back to school, you don't start bombarding them with formulas and stuff like that. Now, during my stint as a teacher back in the 1980s, I got into trouble with the principal and most of the senior staff because I couldn't understand how at the end of an assessment period, a child goes home with a report and he has a 0 to a subject. I think that's an indictment on the teacher. Okay? Don't tell me you spend the whole school year and at the end of the day, that child goes home to the parents and say, I did not learn anything. This is the result. Okay? That's an indictment on the teacher. So the old way of teaching, when it was teaching to a test, I protested that years and years ago, Dr. Bridgman. I think I have a couple years on you, but you were in GBSS at the time, and then St. David's Secondary and all that kind of stuff was my domain. Yeah, and getting back to the classroom, I wonder if you could give any insight on, not just the impact of COVID, but COVID, again, culture is the thing I'm talking about. Change the culture so much that when that child goes back into the classroom, you have to also deal. How do you call that? Debrief that child from all of that false information and all that kind of stuff. How do you debrief that student? So I think the job of teachers, parents need to get trained too, because let me tell you, the debriefing of that student is a whole other thing.
Yeah, that's what Dr. Bridgman doing from Monday.
Exactly. and you have to debrief that child.
And Mr. Vincent, this is such important, but we need the resources though. We need the resources in the schools in Grenada. We do have counselors in the school, and yes, but they cannot handle that by themselves. If you compare what we have here, and it's a different world out here, but in terms of doing all that, debriefing the child, we need the support services in the schools for those students to do, because the caseload in most schools is one counselor. The American Counseling Association says should be 250 something per counselor. So we are really behind. But I think it's a step in the right direction, because we never had it in the past, and now they really saw the need to do it. So yeah, the debriefing matters a lot, and I think teachers, and that's where the training of the teachers come in, the learning of the teachers to not just jump into teaching again. Let's focus upon the students we have in front of us. Let's ask the right questions. Let's ask, how are you doing? And for me in leadership, that's one of the most critical questions I ask my staff. How are you? How can I help you? What do you need? Critical questions for growth and for understanding people. We just don't come in. I saw tears, man, with my staff when we got back together. They were scared, okay? And they were angry because, again, the unknown was very big. When my students came back, the first class came back in March of 2021, my senior class. A student said, and I would never forget this, today is my first year of senior year. That was 6 months into the school year. That was significant. And we did a lot in my school because my philosophy is about caring and welcoming and taking care of each other. Again, we need to spend some time talking to our students, not talking at them. We need time to get to know them. So that's where I'm coming from.
So I'm glad you brought up that. A couple of things in that when we moved online, I don't think a lot of people recognize that online teaching is a whole other type of teaching. It's not just putting everything online, right? Curriculum design, like revamping all of that, it takes work. It takes, a lot more strategies that you did not have. It also requires resources from students. You've looked at, their home lives, they may have one device per home or no devices, right? And everyone has to share it and everyone has to attend class. So I think a lot of the things that were highlighted there as well is, we need to have compassion for everyone, so teachers, parents, students, because everyone is going through, something on, from their aspect, right?
Just before you go forward, this is so important, the number of devices at home and the connectivity with regards to the internet piece at students' home. It's so important. And Mr. Vincent just made a point about giving students zero. Mr. Corian has to.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I think we have some disturbance.
Yeah, he has to mute it. Yeah, we have a philosophy in my school so that we don't give zeros. You gotta get a message to Mr. Corian here.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let me just send a quick message. There we go. Thank you so much. Sorry about that, guys.
The zero piece is so important that you need to have a philosophy where you don't give students zero. I mean, what does a zero mean? Does zero mean you're a failure?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
like your entire being is
what
a failure.
you want for your students.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a very big believer, and this past summer I focused a little bit on that in my training in Grenada on mastery learning, giving students second opportunities to the level that we want.
Yeah, I mean, cumulative assessment. I mean, that was never done. I mean, really, you know, you study you have a whole pile of books to study, and then at the end you get this massive test, and you are in a whole lot of trouble just trying to pass that test. Doesn't mean that you don't know anything, you know, if you fail that test. But I mean, this is, you know, they were teaching to test. And like I said, I got into trouble for that. And you know, I'm a big supporter of you there. And I hope at some point, we could get the resources in Grenada to approach teaching and learning in a whole different way, especially where, you know, we're starting to see a little light at the end of the tunnel in terms of this pandemic, but we can't let our guards down. This whole thing has to change, because I'm also one of the proponents who quick to point out, I don't know if it's gaining any traction yet, but I'm saying we were given a template to run the Eastern Caribbean countries. We were given a template by our colonial masters, and we still use that template for every aspect of government, every aspect of life. And you want to talk about change, you have to get rid of that template. That's what I'm saying.
So it really I think ties to not just, you know, teachers or educators, but policy level, resource, governmental level. So it requires change, I think, across all sectors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in the inclusion of culture as well in our education, you know, that as well is a critical aspect in, you know, changing and revamping our curriculum. All right. So I want to bring us back to the economic impact. And Dr. Charles, I want you to talk a little bit about our shipping lines and the crisis that we're experiencing now with the inflation of prices and the shipping crisis in the Caribbean region and, you know, Grenada specifically, and how that has impacted our community.
Okay, well, we right now, because of the pandemic, we're experiencing supply chain disruptions globally. So it's not just a Grenada problem, it's not just a Caribbean problem. Globally, there's a disruption in supply chains, simply because the lockdown, we only locked down, the world economy only locked down for a few months, maybe about 3-4 months collectively. And as a result of this, I mean, this is about not even 7-8 months, like, okay, 10 and 12 and 15 months afterwards, the initial lockdown in 2020, that was the second quarter in 2020. And because of this lockdown, the whole world experiencing supply chain disruptions. Take, for instance, there are ports in the US. Take, for instance, there are the Long Beach port and the Los Angeles port. There are significant backlogs at these ports. And as a result of this, is causing delays in terms of the clearance of items at ports. Now, someone who is familiar with port and port operations, you would say that the longer a ship takes to dock, when you're shipping containers, you pay per day, and the longer it takes for a ship to dock and clear the port and so forth, the shipping cost goes up. So it's now more expensive to clear the container. Obviously, no retailer wants to absorb this cost, so they'll pass on the increase in costs to the consumer. So the consumer will experience an increase in prices. Apart from the backlog, we also see port disruptions or shipping disruptions. Take, for instance, I think there was March, it was in March this year, there was a blockage at this port, at this shipping lane in the Suez Canal because of this cargo ship called the Evergreen that was that had some problems with passing through the canal for some days, and it caused a backlog. It took about 6 to 7 days for them to remove that container vessel. So I mean, this caused a significant shipping disruption. Then you had key ports, like let's say there's a port in China, I think it was called the Ningbo port. No, I don't know Chinese. I don't know Chinese, so I might be able to pronounce it properly. But nevertheless, because of one worker was tested positive for COVID-19, the public health authorities, they shut down the whole port. I mean, this was done, it was necessary to facilitate testing of all the workers, contact tracing and quarantine of the infected persons. But when they shut down a port for a day or a few days, I mean, this port operations, this will affect the importers and so forth. It will affect exporters, and this will result in an increase in cost, which is being passed on to the consumer. So that's just one side. Shipping is one side. You also have an inflationary effect from, like let's say, agriculture, commodity side, food side, because when countries were locked down, a lot of, let's say, agricultural workers, they were also, in some countries, they were deemed as non-essential services type people. So I mean, when they faced lockdown and they couldn't go to work, and this adversely affected production. We also saw in, like, let's say, key countries, like let's say United States, Canada, Australia, they experienced extreme weather. So they experienced drought, they experienced a lot of wildfires. So I mean, this adversely affected production. We also saw in countries like, let's say, countries in Europe, they experienced a lot of flash floods earlier on this year. So I mean, this would negatively affect production. This will affect food production. And when production, from a demand and supply perspective, if you have a decline in supply, this will cause well, for a model, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the demand supply model, but it will cause a backward shift in the supply curve. It will cut demand at a higher point. It will cause an increase in prices. So this will cause inflationary effects for the average person. So I mean, this will have widespread effects to a lot of different people. And you also had, let's say, a lot of idle out of factories, and then you have a shortage about the workers. Take, for instance, in the UK, I know there's a shortage, and in the US, there's a shortage of truck drivers. So when you have a shortage of truck drivers, how can you get your goods from the port to the supermarket? I mean, this is a problem. It will cause delays. So you have a series of inflationary effects taking place because of the supply chain disruptions occurring. Now, COVID had a series of negative effects upon economies. We know this, but this could also be interpreted as a blessing, because I want to emphasize that I support the comments of Mr. Vincent and Dr. Bridgman in terms of education reform. So we know because of the pandemic, a lot of schools were shut down. Well, physically, they were shut down, and people shifted, the academic shifted towards online learning. And we saw that in cases that we had to use different online platforms and so forth. And initially, countries, not just Grenada, but countries as a whole were just not ready. Now, from a Caribbean perspective, I partially the traditional colonial system in terms of the education, the old colonial routine. So you go through primary school, you write common entrance. After common entrance, you spend 5 years in secondary school, you write CXC. After that, you spend 2 years, you write A-level. So I go through the whole system, study for the test. People who don't pass the test, they might feel some form of, like, you feel like somewhat like a lesser, or I didn't perform as well academically as another person. When that is not the case, it's because the exam is structured. It is structured with specific questions, and if you do not, you could put the right answer, but if you don't structure the answer in the correct way, you don't get the correct marks, and you don't get the marks that you desire, and then you don't perform as well as you can. So that is a one flaw from that side. Yes, also the side in terms of the holistic development, because take, for instance, you have people, they can play sports, they have so much of different technical skills, and the current academic system doesn't nurture this, it doesn't capture this. And this is a problem, because this is not a problem from the academic side. This is a problem in terms of after all these years in school, 15 years in school, and this child come out only learn academics and then come out in the world of work is not a problem, because this child can't really work, they can't really perform like how you're expecting to perform. And why is this? why a child that or a young adult who get all A's, all ones, I mean, they surely prove that they have some academic potential, but it can't work. Why is that? It's because the system is flawed. The system doesn't nurture the skills. There's a disconnect between the industry and the academic system. It doesn't prepare you properly for what is needed to work, and doesn't prepare properly for society as a whole, how to interact and mingle people, how to have values and ethics. And I want to emphasize values and ethics because you have a lot of people, they will get degrees and all. They'll get degrees, they'll get masters, 2 masters, a PhD, and some of them don't have any ethics in them. It's because the system doesn't emphasize and pay any attention to these things. So I think that COVID could be a blessing in disguise. There's a need for the Caribbean policymakers, not just one country, but Caribbean policymakers to re-look at the whole education system and come up with a new education model that could address the supply side challenges that we have and produce more well-rounded individuals, persons that can work in the society and could produce and help the whole economy as a whole grow and develop. I mean, I think this is an opportunity. Definitely there's a need to do it, and there's a need to do it right about now.
Okay.
Well, I mean, you didn't just talk, baby brother, you preach. You know, and I believe I'm a convert, you know, because I can't believe we're in the 21st century and Christopher Columbus still starring in our history books. I mean, give me a break now, you know, because my students that I taught back then, they didn't know that, for example, St. David's was the home of the first tongue in Grenada. That's not taught in schools. Our recent history, our recent past, scintillating as it is not written into the curriculum of our schools. So I don't know, like I said, this is the template we were handed up. And Dr. Don Charles, you have augmented on that in another way. But I wanted to say too that in COVID, as it relates to the economics, all right, I'm not stealing your role here, but I'm saying some cultural and creative sectors, such as the online content, the online platform, have profited from the increased demand for cultural content streaming during the lockdown, okay? And we cannot ignore that fact. I mean, still, the benefits from this extra demand have accrued mainly to the largest firms and industries in the business. You know, where we are now, we're on Zoom, right? Aren't we? Mm-hmm. Okay, so, you know, so there have been profiteers as a result of COVID. Okay, yeah. So we have to also be mindful of that.
So I like the connections that you're making with like education and economics. So correct. More or less as what we do currently can have long-term impacts on our, you know, economic standing, and also the cross sections with sports as well. So Mr. Bascom, I'll come back to you. And so you sort of mentioned that so a lot of students or a lot of athletes could no longer partake in some of their regular programming. So I'm imagining that when things start back as, you know, normal, they'll have a lot of catching up to do, perhaps. But also, so I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe what they'll have to do to prepare when things, you know, get back normal. But also if you can touch on, you know, what we might need to be doing in, maybe it's in schools or in policies, in education, and like whatever we need to do right now to support sports moving forward.
Yeah, and starting with home in Grenada in particular, and continuing from where Dr. Bridgman left off, is that the importance of the students when they, you know, return. And as Dr. Bridgman says, and I probably was one of the questions I wanted to ask him, what it is they're doing in Suffolk County that probably we are not doing or we can do in Grenada in terms of the schools. He probably may elaborate a little later on that. But I think it's important, especially for the schools in Grenada. And I give you one example. There's one student I know of who is in her 3rd year of secondary school. Very outstanding athlete. We always talk about her in our sports program. And she has not competed in the Intercol Championships as yet. Her 3rd year in secondary school, and she has not. Okay, albeit we had COVID, etc. And then prior to COVID, we had the teachers had their issues, and things like that. So, and she may be going into fourth year, we're not sure yet, without even competing again, and it's one of our most talented young female athletes, So I'm making a point, as Dr. Bridgman was saying, the importance of having these young people engage in sports, especially those who can engage competitively. Not everyone can and should be in competitive sports, but at least some form of recreation, getting them out, getting them, interacting, competing, etc., etc. That is very important for them. And it's for some of them for their career development, because some may have the intention of going into sports as a career, okay? Outside of that, in terms of our athletes, especially in the diaspora, we know of some of especially the elite athletes, as I said, some of them have started their training, and come 2022, less than 1 year, in fact, we'll have the World Championships taking place in Oregon, okay? So some of them are already into their preparation mode, starting with the Indoor Championships in January, late December into January, and looking forward to participating in that. So that's why in some cases we see some of our athletes relocated to areas where warm, environment, I should say, especially on the West Coast, and getting themselves prepared for that. In some cases, some have moved to Florida to some extent, again, a sort of warm, environment again, because it's all about the preparation, because they don't have that sort of long cycle to get themselves prepared. Japan was just a month or two ago, and some of them already into a phase for 2022, and then the Olympic cycle is a bit short because, the Olympic Games from Japan was 1 year late. So it means instead of a 4-year cycle, you have basically a 3-year or even a 2.5-year cycle for some of them in terms of their preparation, So it's a bit of a challenge for our athletes, especially our elite athletes. Going on to in terms of what we can do, obviously the main thing is the support. I don't think as supporters, as sports enthusiasts, there's anything we can give our elite athletes in terms of preparation, but that level of support is important. But at home, I think, and probably Dr. Bridgman will speak to about these things, foundation like Dr. Bridgman will consistently give, a lot to Grenada. I think he also make donations to the police and all sort of things. While it may not be sports, the contribution being made by folks in the diaspora. But one thing I can say, and Dr. Bridgman and Michael in particular will know about that. I think what it is that is needed from the diaspora when they make those contributions, two things: thank you and appreciation. Thank you in the sense of, yes, we have, thanks for thinking about us. But the appreciation in terms of recognizing the sacrifices that have been made, especially by those who, provide those sort of support. I think sometimes it's lacking. I have come across people, especially through sports, who have basically said that the sort of treatment they have received when they make donations to schools or to individuals in Grenada, and how things have been treated in terms of, people don't care about what they do, how they treat those things. They're not so much interested in doing that. And I think it's a big challenge some people are faced with, especially in the diaspora. The thank you and the appreciation owing to the fact that the sacrifices those people have made. I know when Dr. Bridgman gets his students who will make a set of donations, some of them used to, prior to COVID, travel to Grenada as a group, and do community work, be engaging with students and things like that. Just some form of appreciation and knowing that there are people out there who really care.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And even highlighting the sports in education as well. I imagine students getting involved in sports teaches them a lot more than the curriculum ever could, like a discipline that they can, grab from that kind of training. So again, it is developing the whole man.
And what it is Dr. Bridgman is doing in Suffolk County that we need to do.
Yeah, so we can and I'll chat with you, Dr. Bridgman, in a bit about, just some of like the plans that you have in place and the plans moving forward for in person or coming back in person, and also developing the whole man. But I want to tackle one of the questions we have in the audience, and that is to Dr. Peters. So someone is asking, they're saying that working as a medical professional in such a critical aspect of healthcare during the pandemic, how did you deal with COVID-19 exposure personally? So the audience would like to know how you dealt with that.
I think I know who the question is coming from, but
People want to know, yes.
I did, while taking care of patients last year, I did contract COVID. Luckily, my symptoms were mild, but just looking at the news and hearings and seeing so many bad outcomes, like it was pretty nerve-wracking. Despite me not having any trouble breathing, I'm ever conscious of every breath that I take, keep checking my pulse. It was pretty nerve-wracking. So once I recovered, I was done with my 14 day of quarantine. The quarantine itself was also quite depressing. And that's something that I know a lot of my co-workers as well as patients who's been, I guess, patient under investigation who had to go through quarantine. I know that process it took a toll on a lot of people. Many people had to go through quarantine several times. Healthcare workers, many times we try to stay away from family members, especially the elderly or children. And it was quite a lonely time for some. Some people I know ended up like pretty anxious, a lot stressed out, and just people just being overworked. Once I got back to work, I felt some relief to some degree because I knew that I had it and I recovered. And so I went out there working even harder, trying to be the best that I can. And I know it eventually took a toll because you take on more, you eventually get burnt out because you have to sleep, you're noticing that you're not sleeping as much because of so many patients that you take care of. And that's a thing, I guess, that we experienced last year. And I know a lot of the healthcare workers now in Grenada were experiencing. Many times some healthcare workers were exposed and so they had to be quarantined. Those that remained had to take on a lot more patient load. And I know that can take a toll. So, and eventually just being able to, I guess, get some days off, resting, even getting some counseling also help in terms of people. I mean, sometimes we as healthcare workers are also considered a second victim. Many times we see these things, we see patients die pretty traumatically, and we feel like as though there was more that we could have done to help. And despite our best efforts, patients still died. So just being able to access, like, just mental health counseling, just knowing that you have family and friends that are there, just getting a call or calling out and reaching out to somebody was also pretty helpful. And I would urge healthcare workers at home as well to reach out, and family members to also reach out and just be supportive, try and get rest. Yeah.
It's like you guys are the superheroes, and then we forget that the superheroes need support as well. Yeah. So I think you've probably touched on some of those, like the kind of support that healthcare workers may need, like the emotional health support. I imagine more resources, because we'll need more resources. So that will tie to economic.
Stigma around mental health, and a lot of people try to avoid it because, oh, you're crazy, or just different things that goes around it. But it is important.
It's because, I mean, someone experiencing death once in their life could be traumatic lifelong. And then you're experiencing that, many of you, time after time. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for the work you're doing, but also for just kind of highlighting the support that, people may need as well, the people who are, supporting or or like people who have contracted COVID, like they need support as well. So thank you so much for that. So I want to switch back to culture for a bit. So Mr. Vincent, could you tell us a little bit about, again, COVID and its impact in Grenada on our cultural arts and the creative components in Grenadian culture, and how COVID has, probably had some negative impact on that? I believe you're on mute, sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I wanted to get back to the other aspect of our culture, and we know we have, I say, the best carnival in the world. And, besides carnival, there are a number of festivals in Grenada and Carriacou and Petite Martinique that were adversely affected by COVID. You have, of course, Spice Mass Festival, the Carriacou Regatta, St. Mark's Festival, the Chocolate Festival, Carriacou Festival, the Carriacou Maroon and Music Festival, the Grenada Drum Festival, and then Carriacou Carnival. Now, imagine the cumulative loss resulting from not being able to stage any of those events since 2019. I'm sure it's an astronomical figure. I mean, Spice Mass has shown consistent growth in terms of participation from 2017 to 2019 by an average of 7 to 8%. Okay, the projections for 2020 and 2021 were projected beyond 7%, but of course did not happen. Now here are some of the specifics in terms of Spice Mass. Okay, now, for example, the people impacted by the COVID as it relates to Spice Mass would have been vendors. And we're talking about service providers, people who provide sound, stage, light, and production. Spice Mass Corporation uses approximately 4 vendors from launch to final event each year. Cleaning services, approximately 3 vendors are used by Spice Mass every year. Vendors talking about food and drinks, approximately 150 plus vendors set up for the 3 days on the parade routes, at all events each year for Carnival, and let's look at our artists, compensation for artists, for example. Artists lost revenue from not being able to take part in competitions in which they would receive money, prize monies for appearance fees and each competition. I've heard that the government has provided a stimulus package to all artists, who derive their primary income from such competitions. I wish the stimulus package could extend beyond the artists, but that's not for me to do, but I could say that, so yeah, it's very scary to think about the impact this has had. And if we continue to live under those conditions and not address it and take, a self-evaluation and say, well, how can I fight this thing? I am not prepared to live with COVID. I'm telling you that right now. I'm not prepared to live with COVID. Okay. And I don't think anybody in their right mind are prepared to live with COVID, because there is going to be that long-term psychological impact on you and your family and your way of life. In other words, as I said before at the beginning, a vicious attack on our culture, and we have to be mindful that our culture is sacred. Our culture is gold, and we have to defend it. We have to protect it. And the only way we can do that is to weigh the information that we have and do the right thing, okay? Because we have to fight. There's no other way. We have to fight. And you hear Dr. Bridgman, and you heard Dr. Don, and Dr. Alyssa, and Dr. Bascom, and Dr. Patterson, everybody, talk about how we can fight this thing from a very, very strong standpoint. So I think, There's no two ways about it. Preserving our culture is paramount important, and we have to do what is right.
Okay. And who was
Yeah,
someone?
I
Oh, go
wanted to
ahead.
ask Mike, Mr. Vincent, that it has to do with Carnival 2021. Do you think it was and if I may just ask a question, Jill,
Go ahead. Yeah.
do you think it was an error in judgment for Carnival 2021, and what do you foresee for 2022?
Well, we didn't have Carnival 2021.
Whatever took place in 2021.
Well, I think it was an expression of frustration, on part of, like, again, you remember what I said, our culture is under serious attack, and people are tired of face masks. They're tired of everything that is associated with COVID. And I had a problem with messaging from the onset of COVID. Okay. And I think people got too much, convoluted information. Hence, to me, the opposition to the vaccine, because like I say, we've been getting vaccines from the time we were born, and nobody questioned the efficacy. Nobody questioned it was mandated, as a matter of fact. I'm not here to say that I support mandates, but I'm saying to you that what happened in terms of the people reveling and defying authorities and doing that, it was simply a protest. That's how I see it. It was a protest. And you want to ascribe the spike in the virus in Grenada to what happened during the carnival season? I have a different view. That's all I'm going to say. I have a different view. Okay, 2022 looks a lot better, and I think the more information that's put out there, the more information, correct information, I have to say, that's put out there. And I go back to the debriefing, because by next year I might be dead. I'm sorry to say, because when I got to Grenada, people told me that if you took the vaccine in 2 years' time, you're going to die. Okay, so I mean,
look out for that.
I'm not preparing to die. I mean, that's for sure. But the point is, these are the kind of things that you have to combat. These are the kind of misinformation that's out there that will affect our going forward. Okay, so my friends, it's not me to say that, to tell you go out there and take the vaccine. But I took a vaccine, and I'm fully vaccinated, and I feel comfortable with the science. I feel comfortable with my doctors and the advice that I get. And I think people should take a sober look as to where their life was, what their life is, and what their life is going to be. Okay. And if you're going to ram things down people's throat, then you're going to get pushback. Grenadians are resilient. Okay, all over the world, people are pushing back.
Mr. Vincent, but they have to also be informed.
Yes,
I think they're resilient and all that and whatever, but they have to be informed. You clearly stated, and correctly so, that we took all the vaccines growing up, but we didn't have Facebook. We have a lot of Facebook experts.
That's the point.
Saying a whole lot of stuff and don't know anything.
So that's the point.
Be honest and push back and let the experts speak. And let them hear it. And I think a lot of them, as you correctly said, lots of misinformation out there. I'm a supporter of the vaccine. And you ask what we're doing in Suffolk County. My teachers have to be either vaccinated or anyone coming to my school have to be vaccinated or weekly tested. I'm a believer in this. And we did that. Even last week, someone didn't get tested. I had to go find that person and said, by Wednesday, you need to do that. Otherwise, you'll be sent.
Okay. Well, you see,
I like what, and I think what you guys are pointing to is for us to fully, in many ways, enjoy or immerse ourselves in our culture and in our education. A lot of health measures, need to be in place. So we may need to take some measures to protect ourselves if we want to, really enjoy our way of life, to some extent, right? So I like that. We do have a question in the chat to Dr. Bridgman. And someone wants to know a little bit about blended learning, just your experience with it, and just the efficacy of it so far.
Yes, I'm a strong believer in this, and I did 2 workshops in Grenada on blended learning.
Sorry, could you first of all just explain what blended learning is for
I'll
anyone out
explain
there
what
who may not
blended
be
learning is.
familiar?
Blended learning is really taking what you do in the classroom to a technological platform. For example, if you're going to teach a construct or concept, you can videotape yourself doing it and sending it to the students. They review, they answer the questions, or when they come in, you discuss it in class. They don't have to be behind the screen for 45 minutes and stuff. You videotape yourself, you send videos and stuff, or you do presentations to them, mini presentations to them. And when they come back in, you can discuss it, or you can give them a later time to do it and stuff. It's not the actual, like what we have seen a lot happening right now, is the teachers just teaching the way they were teaching during the in-person learning. That's not blended. Blended, like if you're teaching a math problem and understanding, and you have to give a rationale for your stuff, make a video of yourself, send it to the students, or send a YouTube video where they review it. So that's what blended learning is. And it's a good way to do it. When we were on virtual, that's what lots of our teachers did that. And students were up like 2 o'clock in the morning doing their work. It's not, we got to understand adolescents. Adolescents at times are not like the 9 to 5, like those of us who are adults. They may do their work late night. So you got to accommodate them. So you send the stuff out and, allow them to do it. So blended learning is taking part of the classroom, teaching through the technology, and students working from home, coming back into the school, into the building, and talking about it. You don't spend time like our teachers are spending 20 minutes on homework. That's not effective teaching at all. So those things do matter. I want to go back to something that we were just talking about. Mr. Vincent also mentioned that, and I hear what you're saying, sir. I really do, that with regards to COVID, but we have to learn to live with it. We have to learn to live with it. And here's what we do. The CDC, I think we have to follow the science. The CDC proposed for us when we got back into school back in the summertime that students should be wearing masks in school. Students should be 3 feet apart. And if there's a positive case in the classroom or in any area, once the students were 3 feet apart from a positive case, you don't have to quarantine if they were wearing masks. And that's what we've been following in our school. And it's been very, very productive. Since the school year started in September, we've had over about 37 positive cases, and I have not had to quarantine or isolate any student in the classroom because we are following the protocol. It's my responsibility as a school leader to ensure every teacher is wearing their mask properly, every student in the building. And I know it's very difficult. It's difficult for me to walk around with a mask for the entire school day, but I believe in this and getting people vaccinated. I think in Grenada, we have to get our teachers coming back in school vaccinated or tested weekly. I saw something, the union president said that the ministry asked them to upload or to submit their vaccination cards, and the union guy said that, hey, the Ministry of Health has it. We don't need to do it. Come on, man. I had to do that here. All my teachers, all the educators had to do that, upload it through a Google form. We got to unlearn a whole lot of stuff. There are things worth fighting for, hills worth dying on. Those are not hills worth dying on. So I just needed to put that out there.
Dr. Bridgman, I don't think we have enough time to delve into all of the pros and cons here. But I'll tell you one thing. I believe in information, the sharing of information. And what we have here is a sharing of information and misinformation that has created a very confused individual, okay? And then when you interject the political element into the whole COVID-19 discussion, it turns it into a pandemic itself, a whole other pandemic, all right? So my belief is that I trust the science, but if we are going to get people to understand that this is the science, I mean, things that happen used to take 15 years to develop can develop now in 15 days. You know, if we educate our people, you know, the more you say it, the more it's going to sink in. It's going to take time. I am not, yeah, I'm living with COVID now, but I don't want to live with COVID forever. There is no way I want to live with COVID. Okay? I'm not accepting COVID. Trust me, I am not. And I know a lot of people are not accepting COVID. Okay? And I know you're not saying that I'm doing that, but I'm saying to you, we are.
I think you might be converging and on the same page in many things that we don't want to live with it, but we may have to for some time.
Well,
then
that's the point.
Put measures in place.
What do we do now to mitigate this and to make sure that we get back to the point where we can safely and freely, without any reservations, hug our loved ones, go to a party, play jab, and all of the above, without any reservations. You know
that is the
you see,
that is the goal. I believe that is the goal.
That is the goal. That is the goal.
And I think it's pointing to what I want us to look at now in the last few minutes, you know, the way forward. Okay, what can we do? What can we implement? How can we move forward, knowing that it may be around for a while, but also acknowledging that we don't want it to be around for a while. So I think I want to start with you, Dr. Charles, and probably talk about some of the maybe policies you think that we can put in place when it comes to mitigating some of the economic impact. And even I'd like you to also specifically talk about, you know, having internal production of our own food, and if that is one of the ways we want to move forward, seeing the effect that COVID has had on our economics.
Okay. Well, we know that the pandemic had a series of negative economic impacts upon persons and purposes' livelihoods. From a government side, there was a decrease in government revenue, and there was a decrease in the government revenue. That's one, because I mean, if it is, let's say, businesses were ordered to keep their workers home and so forth, they'll earn less revenue, the government will get less tax revenue. We saw in cases government increased the expenditure, so this will obviously result in a government deficit. The government will borrow, so there will be increase in government debt. So that's one. So two, you will have business losing revenue, so that's two. And then you'll see a lot of different individuals losing an income, so they will have a loss in wages and so forth. So that's the third impact. I mean, yes, there's a whole side of psychological impact, but I'm not going deeply in detail in that. I just focus on economics. So as a result of the economic impact, governments implemented a series of measures to mitigate the impact. So we see governments implemented a series of grants. So in Trinidad, we implemented the government of Trinidad implemented an income support grant for people that had different businesses and lost their income. There was a salary relief grant. I know in Grenada, the government in March, they announced that they were going to give out a grant for workers in the tourism industry. So you all had something similar. We saw other governments implement a series of food cards measures, distributed food cards to affected persons. And we also saw instances where governments had discussions with the central banks to reduce their repo rate. The repo rate is the rate at which central bank lends to commercial banks. So when they affect the repo rate, this will affect interest rates. Generally, it will mean loans will be cheaper. We saw governments talk to the commercial banks, and that they was trying to persuade the commercial banks to allow deferrals on loan payments, especially mortgage payments, because I mean, nobody wants to lose their houses, their homes where they live. We also saw government implement a series of measures, like let's say they pay the VAT refunds. We also saw governments use, like let's say, the credit union movement to issue a series of soft loans, both to individuals and for businesses. Now, these measures were implemented by governments to mitigate the impact. And I say mitigate because let's say you had a job and your earner income of roughly about 2,000 US a month. Well, I know countries have different exchange rates, but let's say it's about 2,000 US a month you're earning, and the government give you, let's say, a grant, and the grant works out to be about $300 or $400. I mean, $400 can't compete and can't compensate fully for about $2,000. But nevertheless, it is still something to mitigate the impact, so it wouldn't be as harsh as before. So we saw governments implementing a series of measures to soften the impact, but the impact is still there. Going forward, physical interaction, I mean, yes, we advocate vaccines, and vaccines will play a key role in facilitating the reopening of economies and keeping economies reopened at a sustained and longer periods. And I mean, the vaccine will give you some kind of immune response. So if people get infected with COVID, I mean, when we get sick that bad where everybody have to go to the hospital and overwhelm the hospital and overwhelm the surge capacity of hospitals. So from a public policy perspective, vaccines are recommended. But I mean, if you want to, let's say, facilitate the economy going forward, I think you have to have a lot of, let's say, contactless interaction. And I say contactless interaction, like we do a lot of transactions online. Like take, for instance, you have transactions, you have e-commerce. In Trinidad, the government is doing a lot of initiatives to facilitate e-commerce, trying to allow a lot of, let's say, government offices receive online payments and so forth. They want you to, let's say, fill out a lot of forms rather than fill out forms in paper. They fill out the forms online and then submit an email or click some send link and just go to the government ministry or office. So you have a lot of, let's say, digital transactions. With regards to education, we go into what's the direction of online learning. Now, education is a ticklish subject because, I mean, from an educational point of view, I have been studying this issue and I realize that we have a lot of students, right? And they want to learn, but they mightn't have the, let's say, the infrastructure to learn. Like take, for instance, I live in a community and sometimes we have good internet, sometimes we have bad internet, that the internet fluctuates and just can't get connection. Not every student have a laptop. Now, you might get a cheap laptop for maybe about $500, but if you want a proper laptop, I mean, a little bit more expensive. So, I mean, not everyone has the budget to buy a good laptop that works properly. So that's a constraint right there. And so there's a lot of policy support that needs to go into making the education system work. Teachers need to be trained to deliver the curriculum properly because, I mean, yeah, teachers are accustomed to teaching on a blackboard and having some kind of discussion, but then they might have some students not pay attention. They might have some students have distractions for whatever reason, and they can't connect. And you have to find a way to reach the student. And the whole point is not just about say that, oh, I have a curriculum, I have a course outline, and I just want to run through this course outline, and we achieve certain deliverables by the end of the semester, and whoever write the exam pass and who didn't pass hard luck. I mean, I can say this because I mean, I lectured in UB from the 2013 to 2016 period. So I have some experience actually lecturing at UB St. Augustine. And what I believe in is not just about covering the material, it's about helping the student learn the material, understand. Because eventually a student will become an adult and eventually they'll go to the world of work. And you want them to be able to perform and you have to fulfill and implement the duties and so forth. So to actually facilitate the learning, it will be a challenge. Now, it is necessary to do this online and without the physical direct interaction. But I mean, we need to find some ways to improve the system and make it better. I have some experience, I think, called monitoring and evaluation. And what I learned from the monitoring and evaluation, sometimes you have a plan, you have a policy, and it might start off with certain objectives and directions, and things don't go like how you want it to go. But there's an evaluation period where you assess the whole program. Where did you go wrong? What were the shortcomings? What were the challenges? And out of this assessment, there comes policy recommendations about areas we can improve. And sometimes with the first assessment, they don't get it right, but this is an ongoing process. When this keeps occurring every year and so forth, the objective that over a period of time, you find, you piece together and you find the correct policy solution to address the problems and get this thing to work for you. So I think there's definitely a need for the online learning. We try to see how we can experiment with, let's say, with the vaccine and having some people go to school. In Trinidad and Tobago, the government was saying that they're allowing the students from Form 4 to Form 6 attend physical school, whereas the students from, let's say, primary school to Form 3, they would stay on with the virtual learning. So, I mean, this is all, it's a somewhat of an experiment right about now, but we have a problem. This is an unprecedented problem. I mean, the world has experienced pandemics before, but I mean, within recent years, this is relatively new. I never experienced a pandemic at this scale before, and the whole world is just shocked by this. So we have a problem. We have to work together and collectively develop practical solutions to address the problem and make this thing work. Because I mean, if COVID's around for 5 years, we have to find some way to live and we have to find some way to survive and be resilient and adapt to the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned if it's around for 5 years or even more, and I'd like us to touch on just the health impact of that.
Biden, Michael Vincent was dead.
Right. Yeah, that's he'll be dead 3 years, right? Because it's 2 more years he has, or it's already 2 years. Yeah, he'll be dead a few years. But so Dr. Peters, I want you to sort of touch on like what do you think the long-term impact could be if, for example, the population is, whether it's refusing or have hesitancy with vaccines, and some people have hesitancies for, logical, valid reasons, especially with their, cultural beliefs and whatnot. So if we do have that reality where a lot of people are, not vaccinating, and even though we see it as, one of the major ways moving forward, what do you think is the long-term impact of that?
I mean, it's still somewhat early to say, but so far I can speak from what I've seen in terms of patients being unvaccinated and getting COVID-19 infection. And as it's been repeatedly stated everywhere, research has shown people's personal experiences is that patients oftentimes get really severe infection and lung destruction. And many times they end up on the ventilator. As I mentioned, I took care of patients pre-COVID, pre-vaccine, and during those times, there were no vaccine. Everybody, whoever got infected really bad, they had severe lung disease. They had severe destruction of their lungs, requiring mechanical ventilation. Some patients eventually, like their lungs were so badly off that they needed a machine to do most of the providing the body with oxygen. And many times these patients, their hospitalization is quite prolonged and they eventually die. Since the COVID-19 vaccine has been established and developed and patients started taking it, we still do see patients in the ICU that end up on the mechanical ventilation, but almost all of those patients have been unvaccinated. So with no vaccination, I foresee that maybe eventually, and then apart from vaccination, I guess just practicing some of the preventive measures like social distancing, wearing masks, washing your hands, and doing these other preventative measures can also limit some of the exposures that other people may have. But I foresee that patients will continue to get ill and will continue to suffer with, as we say, pneumonitis and then acute respiratory distress syndrome, requiring, if ever they do recover, they still require a lot of rehabilitation. They need long-term care. They may end up with a tracheostomy. They may not ever become independent, completely dependent on minimal activities of daily living from other people. So I foresee that it will be an issue. Eventually, some people, and we know about natural immunity, some patients may get infected, as most patients who get infected to just have mild symptoms. But we've also seen that sometimes some patients, even if they come through the emergency room and they may not require oxygen at the time, or they may require just a small amount to get discharged, sometimes we see them back in the clinic and they have full-blown diseases of their lungs, despite on their initial attempt they appeared okay. So everyone gets affected differently. As I said, it's still too early to tell what will happen, but what we know is that the vaccine is effective, it's safe, and I like this initiative that the Grenada diaspora has been doing in terms of putting out information that are valid, as you said, from expert opinions, and making it available just as easily as it is easy to get a video saying that the vaccine, we have chip and there's magnets and you're going to die in 3 years and it's 5G. And I'm still trying to get my father to get the vaccine and he's still stuck on all these conspiracy theories, and despite like sending him videos of actual research and things like that, he's still stuck on it. And I know some people will stick to what they think is right and what they know, but the least that we can do is just provide as much information as we can and hope that people make the right decision and make the initiative in terms of trying to get themselves protected.
Yeah. And I'm like what you said. I mean, the most you can do is present information, but we have to, respect people's choices. And if they choose not, it is their choice at the end of the day. And what we can do is try to present valid, credible information and fight the misinformation pandemic that we also have alongside with the pandemic.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I imagine that, if things continue like that, we will have a heavy impact on the health system and obviously the economic system as well. And all of these things are so linked.
Patients, they require oxygen, and I'm hearing that in Grenada, they're already running out of oxygen. Some patients may require oxygen for the rest of their lives. That's something that we don't have the luxury of just supplying. Many times other organs get affected. Kidneys, like patients need dialysis. Grenada, we know, are very limited in that sense. And there's a lot of other impacts that COVID-19 has on the body, and that I know Grenada is not capable of providing. So I think we as a community, as a small island, we just not think about me, think about the population at large. So.
All right, thank you. So I want to move to you now, Mr. Vincent. Could you, first of all, tell us just a little bit of the impact of COVID in the diaspora and sort of what needs to be done so that we can bring back culture in the ways that we might want to moving forward?
Well, of course, the impact has been tremendous. I mean, in the sense that, for example, our signature event in New York is the annual Grenada Day Affair since 2009. That event attracts upwards of 8,000 people on average every year. It brings people together. It brings, meet and greet, reunions, if you want to call it that. We have an exposition of our culture, our cultural heritage, the foods and the music and the dance and everything that takes place at Grenada Day. A number of other things have been affected. Our annual independence celebrations. Okay, we can't do this anymore. We can't do it in the way we want to do it. And the impact of COVID. I like to call it the assault on our culture, and I've mentioned that about 5 times already, and I'll continue to say that it is a vicious attack, and we cannot bow our heads down and say it will pass. We got to fight back. Okay, so in the diaspora, I think what we, for example, the Grenada Cultural Festival Group has done, we move a lot of, we didn't do much, but we moved to outdoor events, like in the park and stuff like that, where, you could bring people together, but also asking them to wear masks and maintain social distancing and all of that stuff. Going forward, people are not accepting this anymore. It is evident, I'm telling you, on the ground in Brooklyn, New York, it is evident that people are defying COVID. It's a dangerous thing, I have to tell you. And, but I wish we can, educate people much more. We have to put the right information out there, and the messenger is as important as the message, okay? And if we don't do that, we stand to lose a lot of more of our people. The Grenadian community lost a lot of people in Brooklyn, New York, and in the United States in general. But I could speak of the Brooklyn diaspora. We lost a lot of people. The Carriacou community was hit very hard, okay? There are people, and it's sad to say that we're in 2021, and it was, and Bascom, you may find this surprising. It was only 2 Mondays ago that I learned of the death of Mary Bishop, the lady that used to be assistant to Yvette Clark. She died, and I never heard that. You know, I mean, that's to tell you how COVID has separated us, how COVID has isolated us, has changed our way of doing things. And it's sad. And we don't want that to continue. We want to have a society where we can flourish, our children can flourish, our culture can grow and expand. And we have to be mindful. And I think the Grenada Cultural Festival Group, along with other cultural houses of a Grenadian background and as a Caribbean background, as a matter of fact, is pretty much addressing the issue, communicating with the health officials, communicating with the police, and seeing what can be done, what is acceptable and what is not, you know, going forward. Because psychologically, this is taking a very heavy toll on all of us.
Yeah, and you mentioned losing a lot of people, and I mean, we've lost a lot in the elderly community too. And I mean, they are reservoirs of our culture, and when we lose them, you know, we lose such, you know, rich aspects of the Grenadian culture and identity as well. So
Correct.
that is something we want to be preserving. So, so I'd like to, Mr. Bascom, I'd like you to probably, I am curious, right? So if, for example, like, what would you say to, I don't know, a student who is probably really talented in sports right now, may not have a lot of support or resources at his school or in the community. Like, first of all, like, what kind of advice would you give to, you know, students right now with that kind of talent that can be molded into, you know, that kind of athletic ability, hopefully on the international stage?
But yeah, I want to use the advice given on my program. Some, you know, months ago, even Coach Harvey Glantz, others who had chipped in and, you know, gave that sort of advice. And that, and I'm basically repeating what they're saying. You know, they're the experts in terms of that, you know, in that, listen, COVID has provided us, yes, we can look at the negative aspect, but tremendous opportunities as well. Okay, look, for example, what we are doing here now. Probably prior to COVID, we may not have been thinking of having such discussion,
True.
right? And what they're saying is that, you know, kids, especially at those age, they are very versatile. They are very good in terms of social media. Use it for the good, okay? For example, one who is good in basketball, why don't you continue putting your, you know, playing basketball, whatever it is, on using TikTok, using Instagram, using Twitter, these sort of things. In fact, one of our professional basketballers on our program stated how he moved from Wesley College, playing basketball, and I mean, you will hear Wesley College, who would have thought probably someone coming from Wesley College as a good basketballer, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, Dr. Bridgman might say, okay, it has to be from the GBSS, you know, just kidding with that. But no, but what he did is that he used YouTube, for example, put all his videos on YouTube, compile them. So every time he goes out to play, every time he goes out to training, he has someone with his phone, not a camera, a phone, recording, put it on YouTube. And by that, someone in the US from a community college was able to make contact with him and worked his way into community college, into university, and now playing professional basketball in Europe. So I am urging our talented sportsmen and sportswomen in COVID times, you know, use social media for its good, okay? Instead of these foolishness sometimes on social media, you're talented. Put your talents out there, you know, someone will see it, someone will talk about it. Gone are the days where scouts are traveling to countries now for talent. You know, they're seeing it right there, live and direct. They're going up, they Googling, putting in names, putting in countries, putting in, you know, sporting disciplines, coming up with cadre of, you know, talents, South Africa. And, you know, we competing in a global environment now, okay? So it's not just a talent from Grenada, but a talent from Grenada competing with a talent from somewhere in Africa, et cetera, et cetera. Use that. I want to say also that one of the things I would like to see going forward is, well, two things rather. One, for Grenada, a national sports policy in earnest. We have been talking about the national sports policy for many years. A national sports policy, especially that will take care of our talents at home, homegrown talent in particular. And two, is something we have been talking for many, many years ago. I know when I was involved with the Grenada Consulate and through Ambassador James, we have started initiating that discussion. And here it is now with the pandemic. It's probably a better opportunity. It was a discussion we were planning to have where we were bringing all our athletes, and when I say athletes, sportsmen and sportswomen, whether footballers, basketballers, volleyballers, swimmers, in the diaspora, in one setting with their coaches, in some cases with their parents, with their agents, and have a discussion. The Grenada Olympic Committee would have been the lead agency in terms of that and discussion. COVID came, all of that is probably on hold. But with technology, here is an opportunity where you can bring everyone together using the social media platform, using technology, whatever it is, and create that sort of discussion where we can discuss about sports, the contribution of sports to Grenada, especially from the diaspora. And again, it's not just the athletes, but all of our sportsmen and sportswomen, especially in the diaspora, but with the authorities, the sports authorities in Grenada, with their coaches, especially our elite athletes, their agents, their sponsors, etc., and have all the stakeholders and have a discussion in terms of the way forward. Finally, I want to say, it has to do a lot with the COVID. And it's really astonishing, and it comes back to what Dr. Bridgman was saying, Dr. Peters, Mike, everyone was saying. And I think it's important that Grenadians take stock in that in the space of 2 months or less, we have had almost 200 deaths, COVID-related deaths. I mean, in natural time, this is what you call mass murder. It would be scary. Yeah. And I'm talking about just after August, just in mid-August to now, we 190 something, almost a double century. Okay. If this has not sent a message and this is not scary enough, I don't know what else will be. That's what I want to end on.
Yes, thank you. I like that you brought up social media because it has decentralized the powers and everyone can have a platform right now. And I think that, our young people can use it to their advantage, but also that you're highlighting we all have a part to play. So we are going to wrap up in a few minutes, but I'd like to, Dr. Bridgman, I'd like you to sort of end on the education angle and tell us just a little bit about, the way forward for education. And I'd like you to speak on, for example, in Grenada, if, for example, we have to continue with blended learning for a long time, what advice do you give? But also getting back in person, what advice would you give for that mode as well?
Thank you. And once again, thank you to all the panelists here. I think it's this topic, again, has been really good, and your expertise, we all, interconnected. So appreciate it. As Dr. Charles said, that COVID, the pandemic has taught us a lot. And if we're willing to learn, it has helped us to have a new paradigm in education. And one of this is that to provide learning for students who are sick at home. In the past, all we did, sometimes the students had no access to learning in Grenada until they come back. They've been out maybe 5-10 days being sick. So now you have a platform where you can provide instruction for that student. So that's a positive thing. So I think a positive thing. I also think with regards to the professional learning of teachers with technology, our teachers were never really inclined with technology as they talk and talk, as we spoke about before. Yeah. So there's some positive aspects with regards to the new paradigm that we're seeing with regards to COVID. The way forward for me, I think I'll talk about 3 things that need to be done. Relief, as I said at the beginning, we need to provide the necessary resources for schools in Grenada. And I'm calling on the government to provide the necessary resources. You cannot ask people to come back in person and they don't have the supplies necessary to keep them safe. So that's one aspect I think it's needed. All schools out here, they have to provide masks and stuff for students. Sometimes students come in and didn't have a mask. You have to provide that. In terms of sanitizing and stuff, you need those things. The cleaning of bathrooms frequently. So you need the resources and the relief for that. Recovery. We need to provide investment for students because, again, we just talk about the impact it has had on learning. So they need that aspect. And as we move forward, rebuilding. The new paradigm in school right now is not just the cognitive aspect. We have to intertwine the effective balancing the social emotional learning with the cognitive. So teachers now have to accept that reality that they have to understand the students in front of them. They got to relate to those students, understand the social emotional issues that they're going through, anxiety, depression, and all of those different aspects of the fear factors that they have. So those things I think are very important as we move, the way forward. We will have to continue to wear the mask. And again, in schools, we are told that we need to wear it on the outside. We don't have to wear it on the field and athletic events and stuff. Students can compete without the mask because, again, you're not kind of spending a long time with each other close together. You have soccer, you have volleyball, and you have football and those kind of stuff. So I think the way forward is it's looking good, and I think we need to bring back the students in school. I know there's a 2-week period, November 1st. You study it after, and then you bring the students back. And I know they are going to start because there are less students in school with 6 feet, but when the others come back, they can move to 3 feet, just reinforce the mask wearing and have normalcy as always. I needed to have a sense of normalcy in my school. So I had to go back and run all my clubs, which I like, my chorus singing, my band playing, and all those kind of stuff. We have concerts again. Okay, the only issue I have is my cafeteria that I cannot have my table. So I open up outside where students can go out and eat and stuff. So we need to have a sense of normalcy again. And we get in there, and I think we will get there, but we need to understand what it is. And someone said, I don't remember who at the beginning, the politics. We have to remove the political piece from those discussions. My fellow Grenadians, not everything is politics. Not everything is political. We're too quick to go from, oh, this one NNP and NDC and TGM and whatever else you have down there. Folks, this is not where it should be. We should have some good discussion with other political element. And the schooling is really important, and we need everyone to be on board, or unions to be involved in that process, because when unions are working together for the greater good of our education, we're at a better place. So I call on everyone, as students come back, we need them back in school. And teachers, I want to thank you again for the work you're doing and for your growth in this period. It was a difficult period for you and for all of us. So thank you again, and thank you for this platform this evening.
Thank you so much. So I think you've highlighted, and all of you have highlighted, that there is hope, right? And there are things that we can put in place moving forward if we do want to fight it. So there is hope. And a lot of the things that we know we should do, and if we're not doing it, then we will see the likely consequences of that. So we want to ensure that, everyone is a part of it, not just governments, but, the average stakeholder, students, parents, policymakers, people in the diaspora, out of the diaspora, and, coming together. That is the way forward. All right. So we're out of time, but I want to thank you all so much. Dr. Charles, I think you got claimed as a Grenadian in the comments. So welcome as a Grenadian. So we do appreciate you joining us. And
but he needs to visit.
Yeah, come on. I mean, Maracas is not doing it, and you're killing in the comments, but you need to get a little Granda, so I'll suggest,
Too close for comfort.
Definitely, I'll pass by.
Yeah. So we're looking forward to your visit, and for the rest of you, thank you so much for all of the work you're doing outside of Grenada. And I think that wherever we are, we still can be helping our people.
It's a
All right,
pleasure.
guys. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
we look forward to chatting again some other time.
Certainly.
Okay.
All
All
right.
right, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
you.
Have a good
Thank you,
evening,
thank you.
everyone.
All
And
right,
again,
take
for
care.
the audience, join us next week again. We have another panel at 5 p.m. where we'll be bringing on more panelists and discussing health-related issues with regard to COVID. All right.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
See you.